everybody. Welcome once again to the Big Igloo Podcast. It is Theology Thursday.
Yep.
Smart theology, dumb dad jokes, all right? And I'll see how many I can get in. We're shooting for a record 10. No, I don't know. We'd have to go back. I haven't been. We need a little counter. We should have that on the bottom of the screen. But hey, we've been working our way through this Hollywood Heroes theme. Guys, I didn't start the timer.
Man.
I know, right? So off guard here.
Shame on you, Kris.
But we've been starting this, or we've been going through Hollywood Heroes. We've been talking about just how these stories all connect and land with us on some level. This is why we like watching them. Yes. And what are the truths that we can extract? What are the things that we can't? We talked about this idea of receive, reject, redeem. What can we receive from these movies? Yeah. What do we have to reject, and what can we redeem? And of course, we're not saying that we endorse any of these movies necessarily. And whether you do or watch these or not watch these, I think we would say, hey, use wisdom.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, looking for places where we can connect with culture, and I think we might have mentioned this in the past, just that, Paul, when he goes to Mars Hill, he's quoting their poets. He's looking at the artifacts around them, and he's saying, hey, some of you say to this unknown God. Well, let me tell you about a God that can be known, and his name, he goes into, just talking about the gospel. And so really, hopefully, as you've been following along, whether you know these movies or not, you probably know some people who have seen these movies.
Right.
And we just want you to be thinking about how you can engage. So that leads us to our character this week. It's Batman.
Rachel.
Where is she? Should we just do the podcast all like this? No, we're not going to. You guys ever see, speaking of dad jokes, you ever seen the Bat Dad? Oh my goodness! This guy drops it. He puts the Batman mask on. He I think it's back in the Vines day. So I don't know. Geez. Maybe he's on TikTok now or whatever. But he would just break in on his wife would be scrubbing the dishes or whatever. And he'd do the selfie mode with the camera and he'd always talk like Batman, and he'd have the Batman mask and just do ridiculous stuff and just really tick off his wife.
I feel like I vaguely remember that, but I could not tell you specific jokes he did. But
I can't either. I can't think of any specific ones. I just remember they were kind of clever and funny and stuff, But somewhere in the dustbin of the internet, Bat Dad or whatever. I don't know. It's been a while, but anyway, we're gonna explore Batman. Now, here's the deal, gentlemen. I feel kind of a little bit at a loss with some of this, the comic book and movie stuff. I liked the Dark Knight series. I really did. Christopher Nolan, I love him as a director and just what he does with stuff. I remember I was a kid in the 90s when the Michael Keaton Batman came out. Right. I hated it. I hated it. It was it was just real, and Tim Burton I can respect, as a director. And I know some people are instantly mad at me now, because I'm throwing I liked Michael Keaton. I thought he was a great Batman, but it was too zany and weird and stuff like that. Yeah. I remember watching the old Adam West, shows and stuff, and that just felt weird and stuff. But to me, the Dark Knight series, I think, tapped more into action, maybe more real, if you will.
Yeah.
I don't know. So once again, I'm going to default to your guys' knowledge on this stuff because you guys read in and go way deeper than I'm just like, it's a good movie. Sometimes I don't like to think deep. Sometimes I just want to be entertained. So, who wants to tell us about Batman and maybe some of the themes or storyline? John, didn't you say you just love Batman?
I wouldn't say love, but I definitely love Batman. I'd say especially strong, yes. But especially the Dark Knight series and the new Batman. And what's that new Batman even called? I don't even remember the name.
It's just the Batman, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Batman Begins, I like that one. And so I've just been a fan for a while, and the theme of it is, so again, I'm going to refer back to that Hero on a Mission story.
Yeah.
And there's a line that he says in there that I find so profound. And he says, villains wear the scars of their past. And Batman's not per se a villain, but the scars of his past is really what drives who he is now.
Yeah.
And so his parents were killed out because he was scared of the bats in an opera house, and they went out to the alleyway and his parents were killed. And that really started his journey of becoming Batman. Yeah. Because Batman's different than most heroes we know.
Yeah.
I mean, he's really tapped into the dark side of himself, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And especially the new one, the Batman, in the past Batmans, he was portrayed as this bright, chirpy Batman. But I kind of enjoyed this new one because he was not that way at all. I mean, he was a recluse. He didn't want to talk to anybody. He was never seemed like he was happy. He was in this place where it's like his life seemed miserable. And when you look at the story of Batman, that kind of what it seems like. He's always chose the greater good above himself in a sense. Like he's always gone out and fight, and he doesn't feel like he could take a night off. He doesn't feel like he can stop. And I mean, even Morgan Freeman, which is Lucius, right? In the movie. Is that his name? Lucius, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Lucius Fox.
Yes.
Lucius Fox.
Either way, one of the two.
Yeah.
He's always talking about, he's like,
who's Steve Rogers? Sorry. That's a previous episode.
He's always talking about how he comes back in all these scars and these, like if he takes off his armor, he just has scars, and you can see what he does at night. And he's also different than other superheroes because he doesn't have a superpower. He's fully human.
Yeah,
absolutely. And everything and what's kind of an interesting correlation to me is everything that he chooses to do out of his man will, in a sense, his own will to do over for the greater power. Sure. And so you look at Jesus, who came as fully man. Right. Everything he chose to do was for the greater good. And so it's just an interesting correlation. But yeah, that's kind of a really quick synopsis of this theme, the story arc, the background I have. Do you have anything?
Yeah, well, it's definitely more darker, and so there's a lot of darkness, and even the Christopher Nolan movies, it's like even the movie itself is like, it's got a dark, things are in the shadow, and you got to turn the brightness up on your TV to even watch it. Because it plays into a lot of shadows, things like that. Which
is interesting. So connecting this back to Jesus and some parallels and stuff. What I find interesting is you go to the Gospel of John. It talks about, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, the Word was God. And it goes on talking about how this light came into the darkness. Yeah. And if I will say this, if anything, understanding when you look at Gotham, which from my understanding was always based on New York City, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. That was kind of the, and I remember back, of course, growing up in the 80s and 90s, I remember, there was the crime wave of the 70s. I don't remember that, but it obviously impacted a lot of things. I had the childhood where you saw other little kids on milk cartons, I was like, have you seen this person? We were freaked out as kids of like, I don't want to show up on the milk carton box. It was scary. Probably had some trauma from that or something. I don't know. But, but you think about that. I just remember though hearing things about, even like, when Rudy Giuliani became mayor of New York City, like Times Square was even a place like people didn't want to go. Yeah. But he kind of cleaned that up, But it's interesting that Batman definitely does tap into that darkness. Yeah. And sometimes I think as Christians, we can kind of sanitize or whitewash even the Gospels. And Jesus talks about, or John describes Jesus as the one entering the darkness. And I think that we forget that, or that sometimes maybe we don't think just how bad humanity is. Yeah. Right. And so I think for some people there can be a disconnect of like, well, it's not, it's not really that bad. And it's like, no, humanity's pretty dark if you want to look. Yeah. Yeah. And Batman's the figure who is willing to go and confront that darkness. Sure. Right. Now, not entirely like Jesus, but yeah.
So I guess another way to enter into this is you look at what my favorite villain of the story of Batman is Joker. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to me, Joker kind of represents somebody who's really just fallen to the way of fleshly living. Yeah. In a sense. I mean, he's just fully embraced everything he wants to do. And the greater the good does not matter to him. He just wants to benefit himself. Yep. Yeah. And so it's kind of funny to watch those two fight constantly because it's always this side of like someone who always chooses greater good. And the other one's he just wants to have fun himself. And he even says Joker even says you completely because he has so much fun fighting Batman. And it's just an interesting, I mean, you think about it, Joker's just a darker version of ourselves sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's something that...
he's some of those desires played out in front of us. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Well, yeah, I was going to say the Joker, I love... Frank points out that the Joker really kind of embraces this, the nihilistic kind of like... and so it's like... So nihilism is like... Basically rejects
I say nihilism, but tomato, right? Anyway.
Nihilism, right?
Nihilism. Well, I mean...
I don't know.
Anyway, nihilism.
Lost my train of thought.
We'll get back to you next episode on the proper pronunciation. Anyway, tomato.
So Joker basically embraces this idea that he rejects theism. Yeah. There's like life is pointless. And I mean, for the atheist, the consistent atheist would say that,
you go create your meaning.
Yeah. And so he has this great scene with what becomes Two-Face in the movie. But he basically says, it's like, I'm like a dog chasing a car or a squirrel. Like, I wouldn't know what to do with it when I catch it. Yeah. It's like, that's one of the things I just do. These things. It's like, it's all pointless. It's purposeless.
Right.
And so it's like, his idea is like, he basically just wants to stir the pot and just do things crazy because like life is meaningless. And his whole goal is to point that out. It's like, people will turn on each other and people will do evil things if they're just given the chance to.
Yeah.
And so Joker is like, he calls himself the agent of chaos. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It is so crazy. I love that you brought that up, Travis, just this idea that the consistent atheist and Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the things that Nietzsche realized, and he was a philosopher late 1800s or whatever. Anyway, one of the things he talked about, he's quoted as saying, we killed God, basically this idea, But if you read that whole section, it's not, I think a lot of people take that out of context. I don't think he's celebrating the fact that we quote unquote killed God, because you read those next statements. And even though he was an atheist, he started to see that, wait a minute, if we killed God, then essentially we need something to replace him. Otherwise, humans are going to do exactly that. Yeah. They're going to become nihilistic. They're going to become the types of people that, well, fine, we make meaning for ourselves.
Right.
Since there is no God, we will determine, what the meaning is, which goes back to the Tower of Babel. You want to talk about the ultimate expression of that, and God's like, man, they're so wicked down there. We got to separate them. We got to get them, because they're going to blow things up, you know? And so just that idea that, in our culture, what's really crazy is just how much we are founded upon Judeo-Christian values, and even what we understand as human rights and all that stuff can only exist if there's a God.
Yeah.
Now, please don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying atheists can't be nice. I'm not saying they can't give to charities. I'm not saying they can't be moral, but it's just this idea there's no grounding for the morality.
Yeah. Right.
And it just baffles me how much I hear just in popular society things like, oh, well, the universe must have done this, or the universe must have given me this. And what it is, it's meaning making. People are trying to, you're telling me an impersonal universe.
Yeah.
The moon did not give you anything. The stars, they didn't. Why do people they use this godlike language, but they don't want to say God?
Yeah.
Right. Oh, the universe must have wanted me to have this. No, that's ridiculous. Yeah. It is really stupid. But people say it all the time, and I hear it on, every time I turn on the TV, someone like my wife and I would just look at each other, just roll our eyes like, oh, yeah, the universe,
Right.
But what it is it's you're not left with that. It's people embracing nihilism. It's saying I don't believe in God, so I got to replace him with something.
Yeah.
And so, Joker, which is interesting because didn't you had a scene from the Joker, right? Where you were talking about before the show. Do you want to talk about that whole scenario?
So The Dark Knight, there's basically the Joker is showing Batman how evil the people are.
Yeah.
And so he basically he somehow, I forget what happens, but basically there's a ferry. So they're evacuating Gotham.
Right.
And they have a ferry that has all the prisoners on it.
Yep.
And then there's a ferry with all the people on it.
Yeah.
And the Joker gives the trigger for a bomb on each ferry, but he swaps them. So the prisoners have the trigger for the people, and the people have a trigger for and so basically it's so who's going to blow, somebody up first?
Right.
And it's the prisoner. And so it's you see on the boat, it's just chaos.
Yeah.
And so here you have a group of murderers just saying, it's pull the trigger,
Right.
Right.
And the people over there, they're debating.
Yeah.
And so there's this one scene where basically the biggest, this murderer that basically stands up, overpowers the guard and yanks the trigger from his hand. And he's like, I'm going to do what you should have done, 2 hours ago. Yeah. And he throws the trigger out the window.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so it's this idea of it's kind of just, you see a little bit of depravity. It's the regular people are the ones that are
oh, they chose to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
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 But then the person that disagreed said, okay, you pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And when it came to his own hands, he didn't do it ultimately.
And so for us to say what is good in that situation, what's the, the greater good in those, it really comes down to, it's there is a moral standard.
Yeah.
So it's how do you judge that? And again, I think, if we're going to talk about people, we all have that, we all have that iniquity in us that separates us from God.
Yeah.
And so it's And it's, I mean, the theological term is, human depravity. Mm-hmm. It's like we are, by nature, sinful.
Yeah.
Right.
And so,
yeah.
Well, maybe for the remainder of our time, I kind of want to segue then over into, as we were thinking about it, like, well, we haven't covered Superman, and then but Frank does this in the book, and I thought he does a masterful job where he talks about the kind of Batman versus Superman, and of course with Superman, you've got kind of this creature, who comes from another world to our own as a baby, and so I mean, there's definitely, I didn't realize that even even the director was wanting to play on these, and he even said like Christ-like themes, and really pointing this whole thing back. Even there's a spot where he gets pierced in the side with a Krypton spear. Right. It's like to mimic Jesus being pierced in the side.
Crazy. So Zack Snyder, even said that this whole like debate with Superman like was meant to be kind of pointing back to or based on Christ.
Yeah.
It's like, I didn't even know that. It's like, I haven't seen Batman versus Superman, or I've seen clips of it that I should say, but I guess there's crosses that show up in the scenes.
Oh, wow. I'd have to go and look for that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen it. So
yeah.
But what I find interesting is, once again, of course, we talked about Captain America, but that's Marvel, right? And so we're in the DC universe right now. And see, I know some of this stuff, right? So we're in the DC universe. And so Superman is very similar to a Captain America, where he's kind of this virtuous, moral, Right. And what's really interesting is, Batman, his storyline is one where he constantly faces the darkness. But I think it'd be fair to say that it's like the darkness rubs off on him a little bit. He's trying to resist it, but it's like it almost becomes his downward spiral. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it stands out in my mind that like, Batman, all of his gadgets and all this stuff like that, like he's kind of like a non-lethal warrior though, isn't he? Like he's one that like he's not going to kill, right? That's kind of like his code or whatever, right?
No guns, no killing.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. But so he charges into the darkness, but you see it kind of like warping him.
Right.
Well, Dark Knight, Two-Face. I mean, there's a moment where he snaps.
Yeah.
Because Rachel is killed, which is the woman that he was supposed to love.
Yeah.
And Two-Face finds, what's it called? Who is it? Eric Gordon. Or not Eric Gordon. Gordon, James.
James Gordon.
James Gordon, right. Yeah. James Gordon and his family, and he's holding a gun to his head and everything. And Batman's left with a choice. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I can either let him kill the family, or I can kill Two-Face. And that's the first time. Had he killed people before that?
I don't think so.
Yeah, that's the first time I remember him. Anyways, Batman chose to kill Two-Face so he could get Eric Gordon off. And then he still asked James Gordon to still send the dogs towards him. So he didn't. I don't know. It's just, anyways, there is this side of Batman that I think there's a moment where he snaps in a sense because of what happened in his life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a real scope into humanity there. There's a moment when we snap and we really just start to slip. I know in my life in times where I've had stress come upon me, I've had things come upon me, and all of a sudden the greater good's not as much as a concern in my head rather than taking care of me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I love, and so once again, I see this with, there's this tension then in Batman and Superman that almost gets created because, it's like the darkness is rubbing off on Batman. Frank does a great job of talking about even us as Christians, we can charge into the world and we're carrying this light, the light of Christ and stuff, but we have to be careful to protect and guard our hearts. Otherwise the darkness will influence and it'll shape us, and there's a real honest portrayal, I think, that we can see to where even doing good things, you can become jaded if you're not careful. And so Batman's kind of a cautionary tale in that sense. And even to the point where, the struggle between him and Superman, is one of, Superman again is kind of like this, always does the right thing, everything, but Batman's frustrated with him because he's not doing, everything the way he would want them done, or he's not seeing some of the casualties of even his actions, which is so interesting because it brings up this idea, and Lex Luthor, who's Superman's archenemy, kind of throws this argument, and I want to go to, this is a friend of ours, Tim Stratton, and his Free Thinking Ministries. This is from his webpage. And if you want to look this up, this is great. Highly recommend it. He has Lex Luthor's Lousy Logic. Great alliteration there, Tim. Lex Luthor's Lousy Logic. All right. And basically, Lex Luthor he poses this thing that basically Tim breaks it down into an argument where basically God by definition is a maximally great being. That's point one, right?
Right.
If God is perfectly good, he would not want humanity to suffer or experience evil. 3, if God is all powerful, he could prevent humanity from suffering or experiencing evil. 4, humanity suffers and experiences evil. 5, therefore, God is either not perfectly good or not all powerful or both. 6, therefore, God is not a maximally great being. 7, therefore, God by definition does not exist. Lex Luthor basically boils it down to like, God can't be all powerful because if he's all powerful, then he's not all loving. And if he's all loving, he's not all powerful because basically he lets bad things happen.
Right.
And we're going to jump into this maybe a little bit more in the Wonder Woman episode. But here's what's crazy now, and Frank points this out really, really well. And like I said, if you want to go check out the rest of Tim's article, go to Free Thinking Ministries and just look for Lex Luthor's lousy logic. But as I think about that, and Frank ties into this, the one thing, I mean, we could really unpack this, but the thing is the minute you say there is evil, what are you measuring that against?
Right.
Because there has to be an objective standard. How do I know something is evil? Because if there's no objective standard, then there's technically no such thing as evil.
Right.
And so by Lex Luthor calling things evil, saying, hey, God's allowing all of this evil, and so he can't exist. Well, what's your standard? There has to be an objective good. And so, unfortunately, that's kind of some of the thinking that even Batman is kind of falling into a little bit, to rally against Superman and all that.
Right.
And what's crazy is I thought Frank did a great job of handling this because I always thought, I know the wider critics of the movie, when it's like they're battling it out and Superman's about ready to be killed by Batman basically, and he's like, don't let them get Martha, and he's like, why'd you say Martha? And it was like, that was the turning point. Like Martha, that's your mom's name. Like it came off really cheesy,
right?
But Frank described it well. Like, I just don't think they pulled it off in the movie,
right?
But it's like, it's that point of human connection where all of a sudden Batman's like, it's like he can see those motives, or he can see that there's a shared humanity, or there's a shared human experience. And it's like, I can't follow through with this,
Right.
And so, but anyway, Superman does die in that movie, and of course then that spawns, the Justice League, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
So,
look at you go.
Wow.
Mr. DC.
I mean, well, I got that from Frank, I think. So, So if you want to brush up on your comic book history, read Hollywood Heroes. But I don't know, what do you think about that Lex Luthor argument, or is there any other angles that you guys want to tackle with this? But
yeah, well, I was going to say too, like you see those kind of the trilemma of like God can't be all powerful, all good, and
all
evil
loving.
existing,
or
evil
omniscient,
existing.
sorry. Yeah.
All in those, and as Christians, we say, well, you add two other elements of God. He's all wise, and so like the wisdom of God, and God is also eternal. Like,
right. What was that quote from Notre Dame? The guy from Notre Dame that you had.
You're putting me on the spot.
I am putting you on the spot. It was so good, so I'm going to make you say it. Don't worry, I'll keep filling the airspace and tell you.
No problem, man.
Well, that basically, he basically, I'll paraphrase it, that he said, I just want to give you credit because you pointed this out.
Sure.
And but basically he said, if I had all of God's power,
right,
I would basically stop all the evil that I see today.
Yep. Yeah. I've got the quote.
Okay, there we go.
If God would concede me his omnipotence for 24 hours, you would see how many changes I would make in the world. But if he gave me his wisdom too, I would leave things as they are. Oh my goodness.
That's an incredibly humbling statement.
Yeah. You think about people suffering.
Yeah.
And knowing, again, this like like you said, it's humbling, of like trusting that God is all powerful, that he knows what he's doing, and that he's terribly good.
Yeah.
And that every wrong will be made right.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing of it is that if all we had was this life, I think that would be an impossibility.
Yeah.
But that points to the eternal. It points to the resurrection. That's what we're ultimately promised. In Christ, you are promised a resurrection. Mm-hmm. You are promised that evil gets swallowed up, death gets swallowed up. Those things are conquered in Christ. And so that is the ultimate thing. And we're promised glory for the things that we suffer. But what I heard in that statement, and we said this just before we got on here, was like, wow, that's ultimately kind of where Job came to.
Yeah.
You know, Job's looking at his problems and circumstances, and he's got a few questions for God, but then God has a few questions of his own. And then all of a sudden, like, it's like Job says, wow, I'll admit, you know, I'm this Kris Fowle paraphrase, but I thought I knew who you were, but now I stand here completely humbled, you know,
right.
that I was living by whispers or rumors of who you are.
Right.
And, that's incredible to sit there and think that, you know, okay, if I had all God's power, yeah, man, I'd make some changes. But if I had all of his wisdom,
yeah,
because that's the thing, to say that you would change anything that God wouldn't change.
Right. Yeah.
You're saying you know more, you better than God.
Yeah.
That's going back to the Garden of Eden.
Oh man.
You're right back in the Garden of Eden. If you can't look at that statement and come to that same conclusion, congratulations, Adam. Congratulations, Eve.
Right.
Yeah.
You're making the same choice.
Yep.
I'll decide what's right and wrong.
Right.
Yeah. You know, it really shows you how when we think of good, it's in our capacity.
Yeah.
What we control, what we can see. You know, you don't ever see the greater picture, all the intricate details that if, you know, what's it called? The butterfly effect, when you change one thing and it just changes the next and next and the next and the next. You know, there's an infinite amount of those that would happen if you were to start changing just one person's life, let alone everybody's. And so there's this idea that, is it Isaiah 55 where it says, your ways are higher than mine?
I know it's Isaiah.
Yeah, I think it's anyway. And somewhere in Isaiah,
right.
I think it's 55, pretty sure.
Yeah,
but it talks about how your ways are higher than mine, and heavens is higher than earth.
Yep.
It's this idea that we could never even get a glimpse of the scope of the wisdom that the Lord has. And I used to struggle with. So I'll be honest here. Speaking of theology, I used to struggle with things like once saved, always saved, like those type of questions. And what I've boiled down to every time, and like the other ones, like if people didn't know the name Jesus, are they saved? What I've boiled down to every time is God is a just God, and he knows what he's doing. Because I'm spiraling myself trying to think of this stuff.
And sometimes we just have to, in humility, back off and say, I don't know. It doesn't mean we shouldn't look for answers. Or we shouldn't get intellectually lazy. But yeah, absolutely. There has to be humility. There just has to be humility of like, on some of this, I don't know. Or, you know, I don't know yet. I just want to say, though, you know, kind of back to the whole Lex Luthor thing, you know, Tim really points out that, you know, if we think about stepping in and stopping evil, then on some level, you're negating free will. On some point, you're saying, and God, I mean, the thing of it is like, where do you stop? I've used this illustration before. If I gave Travis a gun and it was in a room full of people, and I said, just your job is to shoot the shortest person.
Right.
There's only a matter of time before you turn the gun on yourself, right?
Travis and so would be pretty quick too.
I'd be safe. But anyway, but the thing is like, if you say, okay, God, stop evil, well, where does he stop it?
Yeah.
Because Jesus kind of makes it kind of clear that, well, you haven't murdered, but there's hate. Right. You haven't committed adultery, but you've lusted. And so he considered those things evil. We, like you said, we put ourselves in the place of like, I know what's good, I know what's right. And nope, we really don't. So, well, look at that. We kind of covered Batman and Superman a little bit there, and just some food for thought. Went pretty deep with the theology. Don't know how many dad jokes I got in there, but we'll put the counter in later. I don't know. But anyway, well, hey, we love that you're following along with us. Like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. We're coming to a close. We've got Wonder Woman left, and then we are on to something new. So we'll see you next time.
Deuces.